This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one website platform. More about them later in the video. Welcome back to Geographics. I'm your host, Cosmic Horror Madman Eric Malachite, and today we're going to be discussing the origin of one of the most famous phrases in all of Western media. Let's get the hell out of Dodge. This deep dive into one of the most notorious cities in the Wild West was penned by Radu Alexander. So be sure to show him some love in the comments and get ready to deploy your likes and share this video around. Let's get started. Dodge City went by many names: the Cowboy Capital, the Queen of the Cowtowns, the bibulous Babylon of the Frontier, the wickedest little city in America, and the Gomorrah of the Plains. Three things defined the early history of Dodge City: cattle, cowboys, and crime, and it quickly became known as one of the most prominent but also one of the most dangerous cities of the Wild West. Many iconic figures of that era made their way to Dodge City: Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, Bat Masterson, Luke Short, mysterious Dave Mather, and Bill Tillman, to name a few. Some only passed through for a drink and a few rounds of cards, while others stayed and became part of the town's infamous history, which we will explore today as we look at one of the wildest places that the Wild West had to offer. Officially, Dodge City was incorporated on August 15, 1872, but its roots stretch further back a few years. During the mid-19th century, the Santa Fe Trail became the preferred way for travelers to cross central North America, taking them from Missouri to New Mexico. But even though it was the best option available at the time, it still wasn't without danger. Attacks on wagon trains from Native Americans prompted the US government to build several forts along the way. This included Fort Dodge in Kansas, which was built in 1865 and stayed in operation for almost 2 decades, and housed 4 companies of infantry at its greatest capacity. Besides soldiers, traders and buffalo hunters would frequently drop in to rest up and do some good old-fashioned commerce, and that kind of activity naturally attracted other people. And so it was that in 1871, a rancher by the name of Henry L. Sutler built a 3-room sod house for himself about 5 miles west of the fort, at the foot of a hill along the Santa Fe Trail and on the north bank of the Arkansas River. Sutler's house quickly became another popular stop for travelers on the Santa Fe Trail. Others saw the potential to claim some prime real estate in an emerging market, and within months a general store popped up nearby, followed by a few dance halls and saloons. Everything needed to supply and entertain the cattlemen and traders who passed through. A year after Sutler built his house, a town was born, and its name was, as you might expect, Buffalo City. At least that's what the locals wanted to call it initially, but the post office department denied their request because there already was a Buffalo City in Kansas, so instead they settled on Dodge City.
I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
And just a month after its incorporation, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad started to come into view, ensuring that this was only the beginning of the town's growth. Dodge City was about to get a lot bigger and a lot bloodier. If you don't want your brand to go the way of the buffalo, then you're going to need a fancy website to get your message out. And today's sponsor, Squarespace, is just what you're looking for. Squarespace is the all-in-one website platform perfect for entrepreneurs. Whether you're looking to get involved in the cattle trade or you want to set up a saloon, Squarespace has all the tools you need to get the job done all in one place and on your terms. With Squarespace's next-generation website engine, the Fluid Engine, you'll be able to choose from a template and customize it to your heart's content. And unlike using an expensive web designer, your website will be fully functional on desktop and mobile from the get-go. With Squarespace's guided design system, Squarespace Blueprint, and their brand spanking new AI and SEO tools, you'll be able to pick from a curated list of layout and styling options to ensure you're able to build your brand the way you want from the ground up. And you'll be able to make sure your website hits all those SEO sweet spots, assuring you reach the right people to grow your audience the way you want. And best of all, if you're looking to sell your wares on your website, Squarespace offers flexible payment options with simple but powerful tools. Accept credit cards, PayPal, and Apple Pay, and in eligible countries, your customers will have the option to buy now and pay later with Afterpay and ClearPay. Ready to get started? Check out squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/geographics to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Now, back to the video. At first, Dodge City was just a glorified camp filled only with shacks, tents, and dugouts, but the entrepreneurial spirit was already there. Pretty much everyone sold either whiskey or food and traded in buffalo hides, meat, and bones. Then a man named George M. Hoover opened the first business in town, which, unsurprisingly, was a saloon. I mean, come on, what else are you gonna open? It was soon followed by others such as Wright's General Store, the Smith & Edwards Store, and the Jones Dance Hall and Saloon. By the time the railroad arrived, multiple one-story buildings had been built along the main road, which was known simply as Front Street or the Plaza. For the first few years of the town's existence, buffalo was its primary trade. The high plains of Kansas were full of them. Giant herds roamed the land as far as the eye could see, making it seem almost unthinkable that they could ever be wiped out. But boy, were they wrong. Honestly, didn't even take that long. After a few years of uncontrolled hunting, the buffalo had become a rare sight on the plains around Dodge City, and hunters had to head south across the Arkansas River to find new game. The Kansas state legislature made a few half-assed attempts to protect the animal, but they were all vetoed, and in 1877, Colonel Richard I. Dodge wrote that the buffalo is virtually exterminated. No legislation, however stringent or active, could now do anything either for or against the trade of the buffalo products. Obviously, this was bad news for the buffalo, but also for the towns whose economy was built around them, such as Dodge City, for example. The city was in danger of turning into a ghost town just a few years after it was founded, but it managed to stave off its own desolation by shifting from buffalo to cattle. During the mid-19th century, raising and selling cattle could be a highly lucrative endeavor, and Texas was the undisputed leader in that field, famed for its prized Texas Longhorn beef cattle. Steak. During the mid-19th century, raising and selling cattle could be a highly lucrative endeavor, and Texas was the undisputed leader in the field, famed for its prized Texas Longhorn beef cattle. Their popularity made them a hot commodity outside of Texas, where cattlemen could expect to sell their bovine companions for a much higher price. And thus, ranchers started setting on cattle drives, herding large groups of cattle out of Texas and into other states. California was a preferred target at first, thanks mainly to a rapidly growing population driven by the gold rush. The journey was long, dangerous, and arduous, but the same cattle that was sold for $5 to $10 a head in Texas could fetch prices anywhere between 5 to 20 times higher in San Francisco, so obviously the effort was worth it. The Civil War temporarily put an end to cattle drives, but they resumed once it was over and expanded their reach into other states. Some of them, such as Missouri, said they didn't want any Texas Longhorns because they carried ticks that spread a disease called Texas cattle fever. Kansas, however, was open to compromise. They allowed cattle drives from Texas so long as they stuck to the western side of the state, away from the densely populated eastern half of Kansas. Thus, millions of cattle were driven along the famed Chisholm Trail, which started around San Antonio and ended in Abilene, Kansas. Abilene profited greatly from this business arrangement, and so did other cities on the trail such as Newton and Wichita. But as the cities grew and flourished, so did their problems with cattle fever. Consequently, in 1876, the Kansas state legislature forced the cattle drives even further westward. Abilene was no longer a viable destination, but another town was. Dodge City. From 1876 on, Dodge City became Kansas's biggest cattle market, as the Texas Longhorns now made their way along the Great Western Cattle Trail, also called the Dodge City Trail. It was a major boon for the new settlement, which allowed it to forego the buffalo trade, not that it had much of a choice in the matter, and snatch from Abilene the title of Queen of the Cowtowns. Although Dodge City is forever associated with famed gunslingers of the Old West, there is another name with even stronger links to the frontier town. Its founder, Robert M. Wright. Originally appointed as a post trader at Fort Dodge in 1866, Wright was there from the very beginning and opened the first general store in Dodge City. During his time there, he occupied almost every political and administrative position available: mayor, county treasurer, postmaster, state forest commissioner, and a four-time representative in the Kansas state legislature. Unsurprisingly, Wright was also one of Dodge City's most prosperous residents, exemplifying just how much money the cattle trade was bringing into the town. At its peak, during the 1880 cattle season, Wright was ranking in $200,000 a month, which is over $6 million in today's money. Despite his large earnings, the founder of Dodge City spent his final years in financial straits, having to sell most of his land and cattle. This was due to a morphine addiction, which required an extended stay in a drug rehab center. Besides Wright, 6 other men were regarded regarded as the fathers of Dodge City because they were among the first to open businesses, build houses, and bring trade to the new settlement. Most of them also relocated their families to Dodge City once they were properly settled, and collectively they were referred to as the 7 old-timers of Dodge City. Another important founder was George Merritt Hoover, who arrived in Dodge City in June 1872, 2 months before the town was even incorporated. He opened the first business in Dodge City, a very basic bar made out of sod and wooden planks where he sold whiskey at 25 cents a ladle. Hoover became Dodge City's first elected mayor, second overall after Wright, and was re-elected to the position 3 more times. He also served as county commissioner and state legislature representative and founded the State Bank of Dodge. Like Wright, Hoover made millions during his time in Dodge. Unlike Wright, he still had it by the time he passed away in 1914, and he bequeathed a large sum to the city itself, funds which were later used to make important repairs, construct the Hoover Pavilion, and even to build the Dodge City Airport. The third old-timer was Judge H.M. Beverly. Although he started out as a partner at Wright's General Store, his biggest value was his Texas roots, since the Texan cattle drivers liked to deal with other Texans. Like all the other founders, Beverly soon opened his own business in Dodge City and helped the city flourish. The other 4 were all German immigrants: Frederick Zimmerman, Charles Rath, Adam Schmidt, and John Mueller. Between them, they handled most of the important trades and businesses that you would need in a frontier town: hardware, gunsmithing, blacksmithing, lumber, and buffalo hides. Not all of them were present from the very beginning, and some even left Dodge City for greener pastures. But still, these men and their families were instrumental in turning Dodge City into a proper, long-lasting settlement, and not just a dusty, forgotten frontier town. But of course, they are not the only ones who made Dodge City famous, or should we say infamous. Conservatively, historians say that 9 men were probably killed in Dodge City during the first year of its existence. Some place that number much higher, as old-timer George Merritt Hoover wrote that no less than 15 men killed in Dodge City during the winter of 1872 and spring of 1873. And co-founder Robert Wright went even higher still, saying that these shooting scrapes the first year ended in the death of 25 and perhaps more than double that number wounded. It's hard to pinpoint an exact figure since Dodge City had no newspapers or police force to keep official records. Still, given that the town population never exceeded 500 people during that time, the number of fatalities was truly staggering, even by frontier standards. It didn't take long for its famed Boot Hill Cemetery to fill up, named that way because so many of its permanent residents had died with their boots on. The first ever killing in Dodge City did get a mention in the press. It occurred on September 5th, 1872, and the Kansas City Commonwealth of Topeka wrote that a notorious, mean, and contemptible desperado named Jack Reynolds got into a quarrel at Dodge City with one of the track layers who, without any ifs or ands, put 6 balls in rapid succession into Jack's body. The desperado fell and expired instantly, and thus the law-abiding people of the Southwest were rid of a terror. Then, later that same month, founder Robert Wright wrote how a gambler known as Denver shot another man named Texas. Not exactly the most creative monikers, but here's what happened. Some shots were fired over the heads of the crowds when this gambler fired at Texas and he fell dead. No one knew who fired the shot and they all thought it was an accident, but years afterwards the gambler bragged about it. Some say it was one of the most unprovoked murders ever committed, and that Denver had not the slightest cause to kill, but did it out of pure cussedness when no one was looking. Others say the men had an altercation of some kind and Denver shot him for fear Tex would get the drop on him. Anyhow, no one knew who killed him until Denver bragged about it a long time afterwards, and a long way from Dodge City, and said he shot him in top of the head just to see him kick. From its inception, Dodge City was known for violence and mayhem, but this kind of town attracts gunslingers on both sides of the law. Although it had plenty of outlaws, hotheads, and drunks with an itchy trigger finger, Dodge City was also home to some of the most notorious and feared lawmen of the Wild West. The first shooter of note who came through Dodge City was Bat Masterson, bio on him available if you want it, although he did it briefly before his gun-toting career took off in earnest. Bat came to the Kansas Plains to hunt buffalo alongside his brothers, Ed and Jim. Then, when Bat was 19, a subcontractor for the railroad hired the siblings to grade a stretch of the track and then skip town before paying them. But one day, Masterson arrived in Dodge City, cocked and locked. He had it on good authority that the subcontractor was on the train from Grenada and would pass through Dodge City, so he waited. When the train arrived, Bat climbed aboard, found the man, and brought him outside on the platform at gunpoint. Even though he had $2,000 to $3,000 on him, Masterson only demanded the $300 that was owed to him. The man meekly tried to protest that he was being robbed to the crowd that had gathered at the train station, but they all whooped and hollered in favor of Bat, clearly approving of his style of frontier justice. The Masterson brothers returned to Dodge City a few years later and served as lawmen in various positions: city marshals, assistant marshals, and Bat was even sheriff of Ford County, whose headquarters were also in Dodge City. During the mid-1870s, the Mastersons shared their policing duties with another Wild West icon you've undoubtedly heard of, Wyatt Earp. Again, we have a full bio on him if you're interested. Earp stayed in Dodge City on multiple occasions, although never for long, and was appointed assistant marshal twice, and even met his common-law wife, Mattie Blaylock, in Dodge City. Although not quite as famous as Earp or Masterson, Dodge City's premier lawman was an Old West icon in his own right, and his name was Charlie Bassett. Elected as the first ever sheriff of Ford County in 1873, Bassett served 2 terms until 1878. Ineligible to stand for election a third time, he endorsed Bat Masterson, who became the new sheriff and promptly named Bassett as his undersheriff, while he also served as assistant city marshal to Bat's brother, Ed Masterson. Men like Wyatt Earp, Charlie Bassett, and the Mastersons received a lot of credit for taming the lawless land that was Dodge City, at least to a degree. The violence decreased substantially once the law was in town, but it certainly did not stop. In fact, in 1878, Ed Masterson was shot by a drunken cowboy named Jack Wagner. In turn, Wagner was himself shot by Bat, but it was too late for his brother, who died 30 minutes later. Dodge City's reputation for lawlessness was certainly deserved during the first years of its existence, but it was also exaggerated by newspapers that wanted to glorify the actions of men like Wyatt Earp and Bat Masterson. In fact, although Wyatt Earp shot several men during his time as marshal of Dodge City, he only killed one, a Texan named George Hoyt, who, in fairness, tried to kill Earp first. Bat Masterson, meanwhile, shot 3 men, but only killed Jack Wagner. And to be fair, the man murdered his brother, so, you know. Jim and Ed Masterson injured several people, but none fatally, and Charlie Bassett never even shot anyone while wearing the star in Dodge City. So the town's wildness and wickedness might have been overstated just a smidge. And nowhere is this better exemplified than Dodge City's most famous conflict, in which not a single drop of blood was spilled. It became known as the Dodge City War and began like many brawls and shootouts in the city's most infamous gambling den and watering hole, the Long Branch Saloon. The establishment gained its notoriety back in 1879 when it was the site of a famous gunfight between Cockeyed Loving and Levi Richardson, which saw both men empty their pistols at one another, although Richardson was the only one who dropped dead, while Loving miraculously escaped with a single grazing wound on his hand. Fast forward to 1881, and a mysterious new stranger had rolled into town. His name was Luke Short, and he did not fit the stereotypical image of a Western gunslinger. Standing 5'6" in boots, barely weighing 140 pounds, Short was a dandy who liked to dress prim and proper. They soon learned the error of their ways after a quarrel between Short and a much bigger, louder, and more violent man over a bet. When the guy threatened to shoot Short before he even had time to take his gun out, Short shoved his gun to the man's face and pulled the trigger without hesitation. The guy was lucky that the shot went through his cheek with minimal damage, but he stayed on Short's good side from then on. When Short arrived in Dodge City, the Long Branch Saloon was owned by 2 people, William H. Harris and Chalk Beeson. Harris knew Short, so he gave him a job as a faro dealer. Soon enough, Luke Short was a regular citizen of Dodge City. And then, in 1883, when Beeson wanted to sell his stake in the saloon, Short bought it and became the new co-owner of the Long Branch Saloon. On paper, this was a solid investment. The Long Branch Saloon was doing good business. A bit too good, much to the chagrin of the Alamo Saloon across the street, which happened to be owned by the former mayor of Dodge City, A.B. Webster. Webster's cronies passed an ordinance banning music and dancing in saloons. At first, this suited Short, one less expense to worry about, right? Except, the music kept playing at the Alamo, and customers began flocking to that saloon instead. When Short hired new musicians for the Long Branch, they were promptly arrested, and when Short went to bail them out, an officer opened fire at him, prompting the gunslinger to fire back. Nobody was hurt, but instead of receiving a fine and getting on with his life, Short was taken to the train station at gunpoint and told to get out of Dodge. Besides this being a gross abuse of power, it was a serious problem for Short. He had invested every penny he had in the Long Branch Saloon. Instead of letting the matter go, he got in touch with some of his friends, men who knew how things worked in Dodge City. They included Bat Masterson, Charlie Bassett, Wyatt Earp, and a few others. Earp delivered a message to the city council making his feelings clear. He said, "Luke Short is at Kinsley. I'll wire him to come on. He'll stay in Dodge as long as he wants to continue business or close out. If A.B. Webster has a woman piano player, Luke Short can have one. If Luke can't have one, no one else can. I have 4 friends in town with me. We're here to see that Luke gets an even break, and we can stay indefinitely. Does he get it?" Eventually, he did. The council and the police force had no qualms about strong-arming one man out of Dodge to help the mayor, but the fight went out of them when he brought some serious backup. Luke Short returned to Dodge City and resumed the ownership of the Long Branch Saloon. He and his friends even took the time to pose for one of the most widely reproduced photographs of the Wild West, dubbed the Dodge City Peace Commission. A few months later, Short sold the Long Branch Saloon and moved on to greener pastures, specifically to Fort Worth, Texas, where he bought an interest in another iconic Western venue, the White Elephant Saloon. Once again, there was trouble, and this time it did get bloody. But we'll save that story because we might do a biographics on Luke Short if you're interested. For now, the Dodge City War was officially over. The mid-1880s represented a turning point for Dodge City. The cattle trail that brought the city so much business and affluence fell into disuse as Texas ranchers had found better alternatives. Obviously, this hurt the economy, although meat packing remains one of Dodge City's primary industries, even to this day. In 1884, the city had another unusual claim to fame. It staged the first authentic Mexican bullfight on U.S. soil. The event featured 5 genuine Mexican bullfighters and a dozen bulls with names such as Ring-Tailed Snorter, Long Branch, Cowboy Killer, and Edom Richard. Dodge City might not have been queen of the Cowtowns anymore, but it went out with a bang. During the 20th century, a new passion took over Dodge City: motor racing. The Dodge City 300 became one of the country's most popular motorcycle races, and here is a fun fact for you. After World War I, the Harley-Davidson team adopted a piglet named Johnny as their mascot and did victory laps with him on the gas tank after winning the Dodge City 300. The media nicknamed the team the Harley Hogs, and that's how Harley motorcycles became known as Hogs. Back to Dodge, the city was adamant about casting off its reputation as a violent frontier town. The Wild West was over, and Dodge City wanted to make it clear that it was no longer the home of rebellious outlaws, murderous scoundrels, and lawmen who delivered justice at the end of a barrel. Even the bodies in its iconic Boot Hill Cemetery were dug up and reinterred in a new cemetery called Prairie Grove. It wasn't until decades later, when the popularity of Western movies made America fall in love with the Wild West again, that Dodge City embraced its violent past once more and constructed a museum where Boot Hill used to be. During the 1950s, the city even built a replica of the original Front Street, and has kept adding replicas ever since, now eager to celebrate the bloody history that once turned Dodge City into the wickedest little city in America. I hope you learned something today, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to deploy your likes, comment down below, and share this video with someone who loves learning about the Wild West. I'm Eric Malachite, and I'll see you next time, Space Cowboy.